Thomas Reynolds had everything money could buy. At 52 years old, he owned a tech company that made him wealthier than he ever imagined possible. His mansion sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured land, with more rooms than one person could ever need. But after his divorce 3 years ago, the house felt empty. The silence was deafening most days. That's when Rosa came into his life. She was his housekeeper, and honestly, she was the only reason his house felt like a home anymore. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, she'd arrive at his front gate. Every afternoon at 3, she'd leave. Like clockwork. For 3 whole years, she never missed a single day. Not once. Rosa was probably in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She had this quiet way about her. Never complained, never asked for anything extra. She just did her job and did it well. The house was always spotless. His meals were prepared exactly how he liked them. His shirts were pressed perfectly. Everything ran smoothly, and Thomas had grown to depend on that routine more than he cared to admit. But something changed about 6 weeks ago. Thomas couldn't quite put his finger on it at first. It was small things, little details that most people probably wouldn't even notice. But Thomas hadn't built a successful business by missing details. Rosa started looking tired. Really tired. Not just the normal kind of tired you get after a long day. This was different. This was the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. He noticed dark circles under her eyes that seemed to get worse with each passing day. Her movements became slower, more careful, like every step took effort she didn't have. One Tuesday morning, Thomas was working from home and needed to grab a file from his office. As he walked past the staircase, he saw Rosa halfway up, just standing there. She was gripping the railing with both hands, her chest rising and falling like she'd just run a marathon. She didn't know he was watching. When she finally started moving again, she climbed those stairs like each one was a mountain. That same week, he found her in the kitchen sitting at the table with her head resting in her hands. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment he thought she might be sleeping. When he cleared his throat, she jumped up so fast she almost knocked over the chair. The look on her face was pure panic, like a student caught sleeping in class. "Rosa, are you feeling all right?" Thomas asked, genuinely concerned. She immediately put on a smile. But it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yes, Mr. Reynolds, I'm perfectly fine. Just resting my eyes for a moment. I'll get back to work right away. Maybe you should take the day off. Go home and rest." No, I'm fine, really. Thank you, sir." And just like that, she was back to work, moving through the kitchen like nothing had happened. But Thomas knew what he saw. Something wasn't right. Over the next few days, he started paying more attention. He couldn't help it. Rosa would pause while dusting, staring at nothing in particular. She'd sit down more often than usual. Once, he walked into the laundry room and could have sworn he heard her crying. But when he knocked on the door, she came out with dry eyes and that same forced smile. "Is everything okay, Rosa?" He'd ask. "Yes, sir. Everything is fine," but everything clearly wasn't fine. Thomas found himself worrying about her. Was she sick? Maybe she had some serious health problem and didn't want to tell him. Or maybe she was working another job after she left his house and exhausting herself. That would explain the tiredness. But then darker thoughts started creeping in. Thoughts he didn't want to have but couldn't shake off. His business partner had warned him just last month about being too trusting with household staff. There had been stories in the news about workers stealing from their employers, people taking advantage of trust. Thomas didn't want to think Rosa was capable of that. But why else would she be acting so strange? What if she was doing something in his house that she shouldn't be? What if there was something going on that he didn't know about? The house was huge. There were so many rooms he barely used. She had keys to everything. She could be anywhere, doing anything, and he wouldn't know. Thomas tried to push these thoughts away. Rosa had been loyal for 3 years. She'd never given him any reason not to trust her. But the doubt was there now, planted in his mind like a weed, growing bigger every day. He started noticing other things too. Sometimes items seemed moved, though nothing was ever missing. He'd find doors closed that he was sure he'd left open, little things that made his suspicion grow. One evening, sitting alone in his big empty house, Thomas made a decision. He didn't feel good about it. In fact, he felt terrible. But he needed to know the truth. He needed to understand what was happening in his own home. He called a security company the next morning. By afternoon, they were at his house installing cameras. Small hidden ones that you'd never notice unless you knew exactly where to look. They put them in the kitchen, the living room, the hallways, even the laundry room. Anywhere Rosa might go during her workday. It's just for security, Thomas told himself as he watched the technician work, just to make sure everything is okay. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was spying on Rosa. The thought made him uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to stop. The security guy explained how everything worked. Thomas could watch the footage from his phone or computer, live or recorded. He could check in any time from anywhere. It felt powerful and invasive at the same time. "All set, Mr. Reynolds," the technician said, packing up his tools. "You'll be able to see everything that happens in your home. Crystal clear video, good audio too." After the man left, Thomas sat in his office staring at his computer screen. The cameras were live. He could see the empty kitchen, the quiet living room, the still hallway. Tomorrow morning, when Rosa arrived, he'd finally get his answers. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He was protecting his property, his home. It was reasonable. Responsible even. That's what he kept telling himself as he went to bed that night. But sleep didn't come easy. Thomas lay awake in the darkness, thinking about Rosa's tired face, her forced smiles, the way she jumped when he surprised her. Part of him hoped he'd find nothing, that she was just going through a rough patch, maybe some personal problems, and everything would be fine. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of business dealings and careful negotiations, expected to find something that would explain everything, something that would justify the cameras and the suspicion and the broken trust. Monday morning came with bright sunshine streaming through his bedroom windows. Thomas got up earlier than usual. He made coffee and sat down at his kitchen table with his laptop. At exactly 7 o'clock, the camera at the front gate showed Rosa's old car pulling up. The cameras were live. The footage was recording. And Thomas was about to discover the truth about why his housekeeper always looked so exhausted. Whatever that truth turned out to be, his life was about to change in ways he never expected. The first day of watching the cameras felt strange. Thomas sat in his office at work, his lunch getting cold on his desk while he stared at his phone screen. He felt like some kind of spy watching Rosa move through his house on the tiny screen. It didn't feel right, but he couldn't stop himself. Monday's footage showed exactly what he expected. Rosa arrived at 7, just like always. She went through her routine with the same efficiency she'd shown for 3 years. She cleaned the living room, vacuumed the carpets, dusted the shelves. Everything looked completely normal. By the time Thomas closed the app on his phone, he felt a bit foolish. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe Rosa was just tired from something in her personal life that had nothing to do with his house. Tuesday was more of the same. Rosa worked steadily through her tasks. She took a 30-minute lunch break, eating a small sandwich she'd brought from home. She never went into rooms she wasn't supposed to be in. She didn't take anything that didn't belong to her. She just worked. Thomas started to feel guilty. Here he was, spying on this woman who'd been nothing but loyal to him. What was he thinking? She was tired, sure, but that didn't mean she was doing anything wrong. He almost decided to delete the whole camera system and forget this ever happened. But then Wednesday came and something felt off. It was subtle at first. Thomas was in a meeting, only half paying attention while his boss droned on about quarterly projections. He had his phone in his lap under the table, checking the camera feed out of habit more than anything else. Rosa was in the kitchen, and she looked like she was talking to herself. Her lips were moving, but there was no one else there. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Was she okay? Was something mentally wrong with her? He wished the audio was better. He could barely hear anything clearly. Then Rosa pulled out her phone, and Thomas realized she was on a call. Of course, she was just talking on the phone. He felt relieved and stupid at the same time. But as he watched, something about her body language changed. Rosa's shoulders suddenly slumped forward like someone had cut her strings. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter with her free hand, holding on so tight her knuckles turned white. Even through the grainy phone footage, Thomas could see the color drain from her face. Something was very, very wrong. Rosa stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. When she finally hung up the phone, she just stood there staring at nothing. Thomas watched her chest heaving, like she couldn't catch her breath. Then she did something that made his heart ache. She covered her face with both hands and her whole body shook. She was crying. Silent, desperate crying. "Mr. Reynolds, are you with us?" His boss's voice snapped him back to reality. Everyone in the conference room was looking at him. "Sorry, yes. Family emergency. I need to make a call." Thomas stood up and walked out before anyone could respond. In the hallway, he pulled up the footage again, but Rosa had already composed herself. She was back to work, wiping down the counters like nothing had happened. Thomas spent the rest of the day distracted. What had that phone call been about? Who had made Rosa cry like that? He wanted to call her, to ask if she was okay, but how could he explain that he'd been watching her through hidden cameras? That evening at home, he pulled up the day's footage on his laptop and watched it again. After that devastating phone call, Rosa had made several more calls. Thomas cranked up his computer's volume as high as it would go, trying to catch any words. He could hear her voice, urgent and strained, but couldn't make out what she was saying. She was pleading with someone. That much was clear from her tone and her gestures. The calls seemed to upset her even more. By the time 3 o'clock came and she left for the day, Rosa looked like she'd aged 10 years since the morning. Thursday morning, Thomas couldn't focus on work at all. He kept checking his phone, watching Rosa move through the house. She looked even more tired than usual, if that was possible. But everything seemed normal. She cleaned, she worked, she took her lunch break. At 3 o'clock, like clockwork, Rosa gathered her things and left through the front door. Thomas watched her walk to her car through the gate camera. She got in, started the engine, and drove toward the exit. And then something happened that Thomas didn't expect at all. Rosa's car didn't leave through the front gate. Instead, it turned down the small service road that ran along the side of the property. Thomas sat up straighter in his chair, his heart starting to beat faster. Where was she going? He switched between camera views, trying to follow her. There weren't many cameras on that side of the property. It was mostly just gardens and trees and the old guest cottage that Thomas never used. He'd almost forgotten it was even there. It was a small building hidden behind some oak trees, meant for visiting relatives or staff who needed to stay overnight. But no one had stayed there in years. Thomas lost sight of Rosa's car for a few minutes. He checked the front gate camera. She hadn't left the property. Where had she gone? Then on one of the exterior cameras that covered the back gardens, he caught a glimpse of movement. It was Rosa, but she wasn't in her car anymore. She was on foot, walking quickly along the path that led to the old cottage. She kept looking around like she was checking to make sure no one was watching her. Thomas felt his mouth go dry. What was she doing? Rosa reached the cottage door and pulled out a key. A key. She had a key to the cottage. How did she get a key? Thomas watched, frozen, as Rosa unlocked the door and slipped inside. Then nothing. The cottage wasn't wired with cameras. It was outside the main security system. For the next few hours, Thomas sat at his computer, switching between camera feeds. He checked the front gate. Rosa's car was still parked near the service entrance, partially hidden by trees. He checked every exterior camera that might show the cottage, but the angle was wrong. He couldn't see if she left. At midnight, Thomas finally went to bed, but he couldn't sleep. What was Rosa doing in that cottage? Was she stealing things and hiding them there? Was she meeting someone? The possibilities ran through his mind, each one worse than the last. At 6:30 the next morning, Thomas was back at his computer with a cup of coffee, watching the cameras. At exactly 6:45, the exterior camera caught Rosa leaving the cottage. She was carrying a small bag. She walked to her car, opened the door, and seemed to change clothes right there in the front seat. Thomas couldn't see clearly because of the angle and the trees, but when she got out of the car a few minutes later, she was wearing different clothes than she'd had on the day before. Then Rosa did something that made everything click into place in Thomas's mind. She walked away from her car, leaving it parked where it was. She walked along the path around to the front of the property, and at exactly 7 o'clock she rang the doorbell to the main house, just like she did every single morning, just like she'd been doing for 3 years, but she'd never left the property. Thomas felt like the ground had shifted under his feet. Rosa hadn't gone home last night. She'd stayed in the cottage. She'd slept there, and based on the way she'd just acted, making it look like she was arriving for work fresh in the morning, this wasn't the first time. How long had this been going on? Days, weeks, months? Rosa was living on his property and she'd been hiding it from him. Thomas sat back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't what he'd expected to find. Not theft, not betrayal, not any of the things he'd worried about. This was something else entirely. This was desperation. Why would Rosa be living in that old cottage? Where was her real home? Did she even have a home? All these years, Thomas had assumed Rosa went home to an apartment or a house somewhere after work. He'd never asked. He'd never cared enough to ask. Now he felt sick with guilt and confusion. What was he supposed to do with this information? Confront her, fire her, call the police? But for what? She hadn't stolen anything. She hadn't hurt anyone. She was just sleeping in an empty cottage that no one was using anyway. Thomas kept watching the footage over the next few days. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. The pattern was the same. Rosa would leave at 3 o'clock, hide her car, spend the evening in the cottage, then emerge at 6:45 in the morning and pretend to arrive for work at 7. But it was what happened during her work hours that really got to Thomas. That's when he started seeing the full picture, and it broke his heart in ways he never expected. Thomas spent the entire Tuesday morning glued to his computer screen, watching Rosa work. He should have been in meetings, should have been answering emails, but none of that seemed important anymore. He needed to understand what was really going on. At first, everything looked normal. Rosa cleaned the bathrooms, organized the study, did all her usual tasks. But then, around 10:30, she did something Thomas hadn't noticed before. She pulled out her phone and propped it up against the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter. Then she tapped the screen a few times and stepped back. A video call. She was making a video call. Thomas leaned closer to his screen, adjusting the volume. And then he saw them. 3 faces appeared on Rosa's phone screen. Children. 3 children all looking at the camera with bright, eager eyes. Mama. Thomas could hear their voices faintly through his speakers. They were calling her Mama. Rosa's whole face transformed. The exhaustion, the worry, the sadness, all of it melted away for just a moment. She smiled. A real, genuine smile that Thomas had never seen before. "My babies," she said softly. "How are you? Did you have breakfast?" The oldest child, a girl who looked about 13, nodded. "Yes, Mama. We had cereal, but we're out of milk again." "I know, baby. I'll send more money tomorrow. I promise." "When are you coming to see us?" a younger boy asked. He looked about 8, maybe 9. His voice was small and sad. Rosa's smile faltered. "Soon, sweetheart, very soon. Mama just needs to work a little more, save a little more money, and then we'll all be together again. I promise." The middle child, another boy who looked about 11, held up a piece of paper. "Mama, look. I got an A on my math test." "Oh, baby, I'm so proud of you." Rosa's voice cracked with emotion. "You're so smart. So smart." Thomas felt like he was intruding on something sacred. This was private, intimate, a mother talking to her children, but he couldn't look away. He watched as Rosa helped them with their homework, as she listened to them talk about their day, as she wiped tears from her eyes when they weren't looking. "Where are you staying, Mama?" the youngest asked suddenly. "Is it nice?" Rosa hesitated. I'm fine, baby. Don't worry about Mama. You just focus on school, okay? Be good for Aunt Linda." Aunt Linda. So the children were staying with someone else, not with Rosa. They were separated. The call lasted about 15 minutes. When it ended, Rosa stood there staring at her phone for a long moment. Then she carefully wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and went back to work like nothing had happened. But Thomas noticed something else now. As Rosa prepared his lunch, she was also cooking something else. Large batches of rice, beans, chicken, way more food than he would ever eat. She was cooking and packing it all into plastic containers that she pulled from her bag. Then she carefully tucked those containers back into her bag, hidden under her sweater. She was cooking for her children, taking food home to them, except she wasn't going home at all. Over the next hour, Thomas watched Rosa pull out a laptop during what should have been her lunch break. Instead of eating, she was studying. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but Thomas could see she was taking some kind of online course. Medical terminology filled her screen. Practice tests. Study guides. She was trying to learn something, improve herself, get a better job maybe. Rosa studied with an intensity that amazed Thomas. She took notes in a worn notebook, her handwriting quick and neat. She mouthed words to herself, memorizing terms. When her timer went off, signaling the end of her lunch break, she looked frustrated, like she hadn't had nearly enough time. But she closed the laptop anyway and went back to work. Thomas sat back in his office chair, his mind reeling. This woman wasn't stealing from him or betraying his trust. She was working harder than anyone he'd ever known. She was separated from her children, sleeping in an old cottage, studying during her breaks, cooking food to send to her kids, and still managing to keep his entire house running perfectly. Why? What had happened to her? Where was her home? Where was her husband, the father of those kids? Thursday afternoon, Thomas witnessed something that would haunt him for a long time. He was working from home that day, actually in the house while Rosa cleaned. He was in his office with the door closed, but he could see her on the camera feed. Rosa was in the laundry room folding his clothes. Thomas watched her fold shirt after shirt, pants, towels. It was mundane, ordinary. But then suddenly Rosa just stopped. She stood there holding one of his shirts and her whole body started shaking. She sank down onto the floor right there among the piles of clean laundry, and she cried. Not the quiet tears Thomas had seen before. This was deep, broken sobbing, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep inside that you can't hold it back anymore. Rosa pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling hands. She tapped the screen and stared at something. Thomas wished he could see what she was looking at, but he didn't need to. He knew. It was a photo of her children. Rosa pressed the phone against her chest, clutching it like it was the most precious thing in the world. Her lips moved, and even though Thomas couldn't hear her clearly through the camera audio, he could read her lips well enough. I'm trying, babies. Mama's trying so hard. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I can't be with you. She sat there on the floor for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like an eternity to Thomas. Finally, she wiped her face, stood up, smoothed down her shirt, and went back to folding laundry like nothing had happened. Thomas closed his laptop. He couldn't watch anymore. He sat in his office with his head in his hands, feeling like the worst person in the world. Here he was, living in this massive house all alone with more money than he could spend in a lifetime, and right under his roof, a woman was suffering, separated from her children, sleeping in an old cottage, working herself to exhaustion just to survive. And he hadn't noticed. In 3 years, he'd never asked Rosa about her life, her family, her struggles. She was just the housekeeper. Someone who cleaned his house and cooked his meals and then disappeared until the next day. He'd never thought about where she went or what her life was like. That evening, instead of going to bed, Thomas did something he should have done weeks ago. He opened his laptop and started researching. He looked up housing costs in the area. They'd skyrocketed in the past year. Places that used to rent for $800 a month were now going for $2,000 or more. He thought about Rosa's old car, the worn clothes she wore, the small lunch she brought from home every day. He thought about those 3 children living with an aunt somewhere, separated from their mother. Then Thomas did something that felt invasive, but he needed to know. He looked up public records, eviction records. It took him a few hours, but eventually he found it. Rosa's name on an eviction notice from 3 months ago. The building she'd been living in had been sold. All the tenants had been given 2 weeks to leave, 2 weeks, to find a new place, come up with first and last month's rent, security deposit, all while taking care of 3 kids on a housekeeper's salary. Thomas felt sick. He kept digging, finding more pieces of Rosa's story in public records. A divorce filed 2 years ago. Her ex-husband's name attached to thousands of dollars in debt. Rosa's credit score destroyed by debts she'd never even made. No wonder no one would rent to her. With bad credit and not much money in a market where landlords could pick and choose from dozens of applicants, Rosa didn't stand a chance. So she'd done what she had to do. She'd sent her kids to stay with family. She'd been sleeping in her car at first, probably, until she'd discovered his empty cottage. She was sending every penny she earned to support her children, keeping just enough to buy gas and food for herself. She was studying to become a nurse, trying to build a better future, and she was doing it all while keeping his house perfect, never complaining, never asking for help. Thomas stared at his computer screen, at all the information he'd found about Rosa's life. Information she'd never volunteered, struggles she'd hidden behind that quiet, professional demeanor. Tomorrow morning, Rosa would arrive at 7 o'clock, just like always. She'd smile and say good morning, just like always. She'd work hard all day, just like always. And then she'd pretend to leave, only to spend another night alone in that cottage, away from her children, studying and hoping and trying to build a life that kept falling apart. But Thomas wasn't going to let that happen anymore. He'd been blind for too long. He'd been too wrapped up in his own life, his own problems, to see someone who needed help right in front of him. As he sat there in his big, empty house, Thomas made a decision. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. He was going to do something that would either be the best decision he'd ever made or the most complicated. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't watch Rosa suffer anymore. Not when he had the power to help. Thomas barely slept that night. He kept thinking about what he was going to say, how he was going to say it. By the time 6 o'clock came around, he'd already been awake for hours. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table waiting. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Thomas took a deep breath and went to answer it. Rosa stood on the doorstep with her usual quiet smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds." "Good morning, Rosa. Come in." "Can you sit down for a moment? I need to talk to you." The smile disappeared from Rosa's face instantly. Thomas saw fear flash in her eyes. Real genuine fear. "Is something wrong, sir?" "Did I do something?" "Please, just sit." Thomas gestured to the kitchen table. Rosa walked into the kitchen like she was walking to her own execution. Her hands were trembling. She sat down on the edge of the chair, her back straight, her face pale. She looked like she was preparing for the worst news of her life. Thomas sat across from her. For a moment, he didn't know how to start. How do you tell someone you've been spying on them? How do you admit you know their deepest secrets? "Rosa," he finally said, his voice gentle. "I know you've been staying in the cottage." The color that was left in Rosa's face completely drained away. Her eyes went wide with shock and panic. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I know you've been sleeping there at night," Thomas continued. "I know you pretend to leave and then come back in the morning like you're arriving fresh for work." Rosa's hands gripped the edge of the table. She looked like she might faint. "Mr. Reynolds, I can explain." "Please, I can explain everything. I'll leave today. Right now. Just please don't call the police. Don't call immigration. My children, they need me. They need the money I send them. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word and tears started streaming down her face. She was terrified. Completely terrified. Thomas felt his heart break. "Rosa, I'm not calling the police. I'm not calling anyone. I just want to understand. I want to help." "Help?" Rosa looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "I don't understand." "Tell me what happened," Thomas said quietly. "Tell me about your children. Tell me why you're living in my cottage instead of going home." Rosa stared at him for a long moment, tears still running down her cheeks. Then slowly the whole story started pouring out of her. Once she started talking, it was like a dam had broken. Everything she'd been holding inside for months came flooding out. She told him about her marriage, how her husband had been a good man once but then started gambling, how the debts piled up, credit cards maxed out, loans they couldn't pay, how she'd filed for divorce 2 years ago to protect herself and the kids from his financial disaster. But the damage was already done. Her credit was destroyed. Her name was tied to thousands of dollars in debt she'd never agreed to. She told him about the eviction 3 months ago, how her landlord had sold the building and given everyone 2 weeks to leave. 2 weeks to pack up her entire life, to find a new place for her and 3 kids. But everywhere she applied got rejected. Bad credit, not enough income, too many kids. The reasons varied, but the answer was always no. "I had $52 in my bank account when we got evicted," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. $52 and 3 children and nowhere to go. "My sister, Linda. She lives 2 hours away in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment. She said the kids could stay with her temporarily, just until I found a place. But I couldn't find anything. Nothing I could afford. Nothing that would accept me." She told him about sleeping in her car for 2 weeks, parking in different places each night so nobody would notice, how she'd shower at a gym she could barely afford, how she'd discovered the cottage by accident one day when she was walking around the property. "It was just sitting there empty," Rosa said, "and I was so tired of sleeping in my car, of being scared every night. I told myself it would just be for 1 night. Just 1 night to sleep in a real bed. But then 1 night became 2, then a week, then... I know it was wrong. I know I was trespassing. But I didn't know what else to do." Thomas listened without interrupting. He watched this strong, proud woman break down in front of him, sharing her deepest shame and fear. "I send every penny to Linda for the kids," Rosa continued. "Every single penny except what I need for gas and a little food. I'm studying online to become a licensed practical nurse. The course is almost free, through a state program. If I can pass the exam, I can make better money. I can get my kids back. That's all I want, Mr. Reynolds. I just want my babies back with me. She looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. I'll pack my things and leave right now. I'll understand if you want to fire me. I'll understand if you never want to see me again. I just ask, please, can you give me a week to find somewhere else to go? 1 week and I promise you'll never hear from me again. Thomas sat back in his chair and looked at this woman who'd been keeping his house perfect for 3 years, while her entire life fell apart. This woman who studied during her lunch breaks and video called her kids every morning, and cried in his laundry room when she thought no one was watching. Rosa, he said slowly, how many bedrooms does that cottage have? Rosa looked confused by the question. 3 bedrooms, sir, and a living room and a full kitchen. But I've only been using 1 bedroom. I haven't touched anything else. I've been very careful not to. 3 bedrooms, Thomas interrupted. That's perfect. 1 for you, 1 for the girls to share, 1 for the boy. Or however you want to arrange it. Rosa stared at him. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying bring your children home, Rosa, today, tomorrow, as soon as you can get them here. The cottage is yours. It's been sitting empty for years. Someone should be living in it. Someone should be using it. Mr. Reynolds, I can't. You can and you will, Thomas said firmly. Consider it part of your compensation. The cottage comes with the job, rent-free. It's not charity. It's just fair. I own this entire property, and I'm living here alone in this giant house. It's ridiculous. The cottage should be used. Rosa was shaking her head, tears flowing freely now. I could never accept that. It's too much. That's not all, Thomas continued. I'm raising your salary by 40%, effective immediately. And I'm going to cover your nursing school tuition. All of it, books, exams, everything you need. My company has an education benefit program that I've never used. Consider it used. Why? Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do this for me? Thomas thought about that question. He thought about his big empty house and his divorce and how lonely he'd been for years. He thought about all his money sitting in bank accounts doing nothing, meaning nothing. He thought about those 3 children living 2 hours away from their mother. Because I can, he said simply. Because you've been loyal to me for 3 years and I never once asked if you needed help. Because your kids deserve to live with their mother. Because it's the right thing to do. He paused, then added, but there's one condition. Rosa tensed, waiting. You stop working yourself to death, Thomas said. You work normal hours. You take real lunch breaks. You have dinner with your children every night. You focus on your nursing school. You take care of yourself and your family. That's the condition. Rosa covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Not sad crying this time. Something else, relief, hope, joy. All mixed together. Thank you, she whispered through her tears. Thank you, thank you, thank you. 3 weeks later, Thomas was working in his office when he heard something he hadn't heard in years. Laughter. Children's laughter, floating through the open window from the cottage garden. He got up and looked outside. Rosa's 3 kids were playing in the grass, chasing each other around the big oak tree. Rosa sat on the cottage porch with her laptop and textbooks, studying in the afternoon sun. But she wasn't exhausted anymore. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She looked peaceful, happy. One of the kids, the youngest boy, ran up to his mother. Mama, can we have a snack? Of course, baby. Go inside and get some fruit from the kitchen. Your kitchen, she added, like she still couldn't quite believe it was real. Thomas smiled and went back to his desk. He had a board meeting in an hour, contracts to review, emails to answer. The same work he'd been doing for years. But somehow it all felt different now. It all felt like it meant something. His assistant buzzed his intercom. Mr. Reynolds, the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow. Thanks, Thomas said. Then, on impulse, he added, Actually, I'm taking the afternoon off. He closed his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and walked outside. As he passed the cottage, Rosa looked up from her studies. Mr. Reynolds, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Thomas said. I just realized I've been working too hard. Thought I'd take a walk around the property. It's a beautiful day. Rosa smiled. A real, genuine smile. It really is. As Thomas walked through his gardens, listening to the children play and Rosa humming while she studied, he thought about wealth. Real wealth. Not money in the bank or stocks or properties, but this. The knowledge that you'd change someone's life for the better. That you'd helped a family stay together. That your big empty property now felt like a home. All his millions had never brought him the sense of purpose he felt right now. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't what you have. It's what you can give to someone who truly needs it.